When I was 16, my parents handed me something that would change everything. A book called How to Grow Up. They said it with straight faces, like they were giving me the key to the universe. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of twisted birthday prank. But then I saw the sticky notes marking specific chapters, the highlighted passages about responsibility and maturity, and I realized this wasn't a joke. This was their verdict on who I was. What my parents never imagined was that their little lesson would backfire spectacularly. That book didn't just teach me how to grow up, it taught me exactly how to turn their own expectations against them. And what happened next? Well, let's just say they got a master class in consequences they never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this one, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Maya had always lived under a microscope. Her parents weren't just strict, they were control architects, designing every aspect of her life with military precision. Every decision she made was scrutinized, every mistake catalogued, every moment of independence crushed before it could take root. At 16, Maya's daily routine was a carefully choreographed performance. Wake up at 6 a.m. sharp, not 6:01, because that showed a lack of discipline. Breakfast had to be finished by 6:30, backpack organized the night before, bed made with hospital corners. Her mother would inspect her room like a drill sergeant, running fingers along surfaces to check for dust that didn't exist. But it wasn't just the rules that suffocated Maya, it was the constant commentary. Maya, you're being childish. Maya, a mature person would have thought of that. Maya, when will you finally start acting your age? These phrases followed her like a shadow, whispered during dinner conversations, muttered when she forgot to sort the mail, shouted when she dared to express an opinion that differed from theirs. Her parents had this twisted belief that responsibility meant perfection, and perfection meant never questioning their authority. When Maya wanted to join the drama club, they called it frivolous. When she asked to hang out with friends on weekends, they labeled it irresponsible. When she suggested maybe, just maybe, she could have some input on her own curfew, they exchanged those looks, the ones that said she was proving their point about her immaturity. The breaking point came during a family dinner when Maya accidentally knocked over her water glass while reaching for the salt. It was such a small thing, but her father slammed his fork down and declared, "This is exactly what we're talking about, Maya. You don't think before you act. You're careless, impulsive, and frankly, we're tired of treating you like an adult when you clearly aren't ready for that responsibility." That's when her mother chimed in with the final blow. "We've been discussing this, and we think it's time you learned what it really means to grow up. Some people your age figure it out naturally, but you need guidance." The book wasn't just a gift, it was a manifesto of everything they believed was wrong with her. Every page they had marked, every passage they had highlighted, was another way of saying you're not enough. It sat on her desk like a monument to their disappointment, a daily reminder that in their eyes, she was still a child playing dress-up in a teenager's body. What Maya's parents never understood was that their constant need to control and belittle hadn't made her more responsible, it had made her incredibly resourceful. And that book they thought would fix her, it was about to become the very tool that would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The book became their weapon of choice. Every argument, every disagreement, every moment Maya showed the slightest hint of independence, her parents would wave that cursed thing around like it was some kind of holy scripture. "Maya, did you even read chapter 3? It specifically talks about thinking before you speak." This came after Maya had the audacity to suggest that maybe doing homework until midnight every night wasn't healthy for a 16-year-old. Chapter 7, Maya. Financial responsibility. Maybe if you actually absorbed what you're reading, you'd understand why we can't just buy you everything you want. This was their response when Maya asked if she could get a job at the local bookstore. To actually earn her own money and learn real financial responsibility. The worst part wasn't just the constant references to the book, It was how they'd weaponized every single page. Her mother had gone through and highlighted specific passages, then taped little notes to Maya's bedroom mirror. A mature person takes criticism constructively. This appeared after Maya got upset about being grounded for getting a B+ instead of an A. Adults don't make excuses, they make solutions. This gem showed up when Maya tried to explain why she was 10 minutes late coming home from school because she'd helped a classmate who'd fallen. Maya tried everything to meet their impossible standards. She reorganized her entire study schedule, color-coding her assignments, and creating detailed timelines for every project. She volunteered to do extra chores around the house, thinking maybe if she proved how responsible she was, they'd ease up. She even started reading other self-help books, hoping to show them she was serious about personal growth. But nothing worked. When she aced her chemistry test, they asked why she hadn't gotten extra credit. When she deep-cleaned the kitchen without being asked, they pointed out she'd missed a spot behind the coffee maker. When she came home from school with a story about standing up to a bully who was picking on a younger kid, they lectured her about not getting involved in other people's problems and referenced, you guessed it, another chapter from the book. Maya started keeping a journal during this time, and looking back, she could see exactly when her mindset shifted. The entry from October 15th was particularly telling. They want me to be an adult so badly? Fine. But they have no idea what they're actually asking for. The turning point came during college application season. Maya had researched schools, written essays, and put together what she thought was a solid list of universities. But when she presented her choices to her parents, they dismissed almost everything. Maya, did you consider the practical implications? Chapter 12 talks about making decisions based on logic, not emotion. They wanted her to apply only to schools with pre-med programs, despite Maya having zero interest in medicine. That night, Maya sat on her bed, staring at that book that had tormented her for months. She picked it up and started reading, really reading this time. Not the highlighted passages her parents had marked, but the whole thing. And that's when something clicked. The book wasn't just about growing up. It was about taking control of your own life, making your own decisions, and accepting the consequences of your actions. Her parents had been so focused on the parts about obedience and responsibility that they'd completely missed the chapters about independence, critical thinking, and standing up for yourself. Maya closed the book with a smile that would have terrified her parents if they'd seen it. They wanted her to grow up. They wanted her to be an adult. Perfect. Because adults don't just follow orders, they make strategic decisions. And Maya had just figured out exactly what her next move was going to be. The moment everything changed happened on a Tuesday night in November. Maya had been staring at her college rejection letter from the one school she'd actually wanted to attend. Not the pre-med programs her parents had forced her to apply to, but the art therapy program she'd secretly applied for with her own money. Rejected, not because of her grades or her essays, but because the application had been incomplete. Turns out, when you're 17 and trying to navigate college applications without parental support, you miss things like recommendation letter deadlines and transcript requests. Maya sat there holding that rejection letter, and something inside her just snapped. Not in an angry way, but in a clarifying way, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. She walked over to her desk and picked up that book. The book that had been haunting her for months. And for the first time since her parents had given it to her, Maya opened it with genuine curiosity instead of resentment. That's when she found it. Chapter 7. Taking initiative when others won't support your goals. The irony was so perfect it almost felt like fate. Maya started reading, really reading, and she realized something that made her laugh out loud in the quiet of her room. Her parents had been quoting this book for months, but they clearly hadn't read past the chapters about obedience and following rules. Because Chapter 7 was all about making independent decisions, taking calculated risks, and here was the kicker, demonstrating maturity through action, not words. That night, Maya made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, she was going to reapply to college. All of the colleges. But this time, she wasn't going to tell her parents about the applications that actually mattered to her. She'd let them think she was only applying to their approved list while secretly building her real future. Second, she was going to get a job. Not just any job, but a job that would teach her real independence and give her the financial freedom to make her own choices. And third, this was the masterstroke. She was going to document every single piece of advice from that book and follow it to the letter. Not the twisted version her parents had been force-feeding her, but the actual advice about becoming a self-sufficient adult. Maya spent the next week reading every chapter, taking notes, and creating what she privately called the Independence Project. Every time her parents referenced the book to criticize her, she'd smile and nod, knowing that she was about to give them exactly what they'd been asking for. The beautiful part was that everything she was planning was completely defensible. How could they argue against their daughter following the exact advice they'd been shoving down her throat for months? But Maya wasn't going to reveal her plan all at once. No, she was going to execute it piece by piece, letting her parents slowly realize that they'd created exactly the independent, decisive adult they claimed to want, just not in the way they'd expected. It started the very next day, when Maya came home from school and announced she'd gotten a job at the local library. When her parents protested that she was too busy with school, Maya simply smiled and said, "Chapter 12 talks about balancing responsibilities and taking on challenges that promote growth. I thought you'd be proud of me for taking initiative." They couldn't argue with their own book. That was just the beginning. Maya's plan unfolded over 6 months like a perfectly choreographed symphony of independence. Each move was calculated, each decision backed by the very book her parents had used to control her for so long. The job at the library was just the opening act. Within 3 weeks, Maya had impressed her supervisor so much that she was offered additional hours and a small raise. When her parents complained that work was interfering with her studies, Maya calmly pulled out the book and read directly from Chapter 15. Real-world experience teaches lessons that classroom learning cannot provide. Young adults should seek opportunities to apply their knowledge in practical settings. They went quiet. What could they say? It was their own highlighted passage. But Maya was just getting started. While working at the library, she'd been quietly researching scholarship opportunities and alternative paths to college. She discovered a program that would allow her to complete her senior year early through a combination of AP credits and community college courses, while also working part-time in an art therapy clinic. The beauty of this plan was that it checked every box her parents claimed to care about: academic excellence, financial responsibility, practical experience, and personal growth. The only problem, from their perspective, was that Maya had arranged all of it without asking their permission. Maya waited until the perfect moment to reveal her master plan. It was a Sunday evening in April, during one of their traditional family meetings where her parents would review her grades, critique her choices, and inevitably reference that cursed book. Her mother started the usual routine. "Maya, we need to discuss your college plans. We've been thinking, and we really believe pre-med is the most practical choice." Chapter 4 clearly states. "Actually," Maya interrupted, her voice steady and calm, "I've been thinking about that too. And you're absolutely right about following the advice in the book." Her parents exchanged glances, clearly suspicious of her sudden agreeability. Maya continued, "Which is why I've decided to follow Chapter 18's advice about taking ownership of your future through decisive action and strategic planning." She pulled out a folder, thick with documents, applications, and official letters. "I've been accepted to the art therapy program at State University with a partial academic scholarship. I've also secured a position as a paid intern at the Riverside Mental Health Center, which will give me hands-on experience in my field while I'm still in school. Additionally, I've arranged to graduate high school a semester early by completing my remaining credits through community college courses, which will save money and allow me to start working sooner." The silence in the room was deafening. Maya wasn't finished. I've also opened my own bank account and have been saving money from my library job. I have enough to cover my first semester's remaining expenses after the scholarship, and I've already secured student housing. Oh, and I got my driver's license last month and have been looking at used cars within my budget range. Her father was the first to find his voice, but it came out as more of a croak. Maya, you can't make these decisions without consulting us. You're still a minor. You need our permission. Actually, Dad, I turn 18 next month. And according to Chapter 22, the transition to adult responsibility, mature individuals should gradually take on more decision-making authority as they approach adulthood. I've been following that advice for the past 6 months. Maya pulled out another document. This is a letter from Dr. Martinez at the Mental Health Center. She's been supervising my volunteer work there, and she wrote a recommendation for my college application. She mentions how impressed she's been with my maturity, my initiative, and my ability to work independently. Her mother's face had gone completely white. Maya, this is ridiculous. You can't just uproot your entire life plan because you read a few chapters in a book. The same book you've been using to lecture me for 8 months? Maya's smile was perfectly calm, perfectly rational. The same book that taught me about financial planning, goal setting, and taking responsibility for my own life? She opened to a page she bookmarked. Chapter 31. True maturity is demonstrated when young adults can identify their own strengths, pursue their passions, and create realistic plans to achieve their goals without requiring constant supervision or approval from others. The room was so quiet Maya could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. Her father tried a different approach. Maya, we're proud that you've been taking initiative, but you're making rash decisions. You need to slow down and think about this practically. I've been thinking about this for 6 months, Dad. I've researched career prospects in art therapy, calculated the return on investment for my education, and created a 5-year financial plan. I've also spoken with 3 professionals in the field about realistic expectations and growth opportunities. Maya pulled out yet another folder. Here's my budget breakdown, my academic timeline, and my backup plans in case any part of my primary plan doesn't work out. I even have a contingency fund started in case of emergencies. Her mother was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. But Maya, you're 17. You can't possibly be ready for this level of independence. Mom, last week you told me I was immature because I forgot to put my cereal bowl in the dishwasher. This week I've planned out the next 4 years of my life using the exact principles you've been trying to teach me. Which version of me is the real one? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya watched as the reality of the situation slowly dawned on her parents. They'd spent months telling her to grow up, to be responsible, to take control of her life. And now that she'd done exactly that, they were terrified. The beautiful thing about all of this, Maya continued, her voice still perfectly measured, is that everything I've done has been guided by the lessons in this book. The book you gave me. The book you insisted I read and follow. She stood up, gathering her folders and documents. I start my college prep courses next month. I'll be moving into the dorms in August. My internship begins in September. And by next Christmas, I'll be a completely independent adult, just like you always said you wanted me to be. Maya paused at the doorway and turned back to her parents, who were still sitting in stunned silence. Oh, and one more thing. Chapter 45 has a really interesting section about how parents need to learn to respect their adult children's decisions, even when those decisions differ from what the parents would choose. You might want to read that one tonight. As Maya walked up the stairs to her room, she could hear her parents starting to argue in hushed, frantic whispers. But for the first time in months, their voices couldn't touch her. She'd beaten them at their own game, using their own rules, following their own advice. The book that was meant to control her had instead become her roadmap to freedom. And the most satisfying part? They couldn't say a single word against any of it without admitting they'd been wrong about her all along. 3 years later, Maya was sitting in her apartment, her own apartment that she paid for with her own money, when her phone rang. It was her mother. "Maya, honey, we saw the article about you in the local newspaper. The one about your work with teenage trauma survivors at the clinic. We're really proud of you." Maya smiled as she looked around her small but comfortable living space. The walls were covered with certificates from her training programs, thank you letters from clients, and photos from the community workshops she'd been running. Her art therapy practice was thriving. She'd just been accepted into a master's program with full funding, and she'd even been invited to speak at a conference about innovative approaches to adolescent mental health. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Maya, I need to ask you something. How did you know? How did you know all of this would work out?" Maya glanced at her bookshelf, where that old How to Grow Up book sat between her psychology textbooks and art supplies. She'd kept it, not out of resentment, but as a reminder of how dramatically things could change when you stopped letting other people define your potential. "Honestly, Mom, I just followed the advice you and Dad gave me. I took initiative, made a plan, and took responsibility for my own life. But we thought you were being reckless. We thought you were making a huge mistake." Maya leaned back in her chair, thinking about how to respond. The truth was, her parents had been calling more frequently lately. Not to criticize or control, but to ask for advice. Her father had even mentioned that he was considering a career change and wanted to know how Maya had been so confident in her decisions. "The thing is, Mom, that book you gave me, it actually had really good advice. The problem wasn't the book. It was that you and Dad were so focused on the chapters about following rules that you missed all the parts about thinking independently and trusting yourself to make good choices." Another pause. "Maya, we owe you an apology. A big one. We spent so much time trying to control your future that we almost ruined it entirely." Maya felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted: independence, respect, a career she loved, and parents who finally saw her as capable. But it had taken 3 years of limited contact and her own success to get there. "I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. But you know what's funny? That whole experience taught me something valuable about working with teenagers. When adults constantly tell kids they're not ready for responsibility, those kids start to believe it. But when you actually give them real challenges and trust them to handle it, they usually rise to the occasion. Is that what we should have done with you?" Maya looked at a framed photo on her desk. It was from her high school graduation, where she'd been valedictorian of her early completion program. Her parents were in the picture, looking proud but also bewildered, like they couldn't quite believe their immature daughter had pulled off something so impressive. "What you should have done, Mom, is trusted that you'd raised me well enough to make good decisions when it mattered. Instead, you micromanaged me so much that I never got the chance to prove I was capable until I had to do it in secret." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with her mother asking about Maya's work, her apartment, her plans for graduate school. It was the first time in years that they talked without her parents trying to give unsolicited advice or express concern about her choices. After they hung up, Maya pulled that old book off her shelf and flipped through it one more time. So many of the highlighted passages her parents had marked were actually about independence and self-determination, concepts they'd somehow twisted into arguments for obedience and control. She stopped at chapter 35. The ultimate goal of parenting is not to create compliant children, but to raise confident adults who can navigate the world without constant guidance. Maya laughed out loud. Her parents had highlighted that passage, but they'd apparently never actually absorbed its meaning. The irony was perfect. That book they'd given her to teach her how to grow up their way had instead taught her something much more valuable: how to grow up her own way, how to trust her instincts, make her own mistakes, and build a life based on her own values rather than someone else's expectations. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the clinic. "Great session with the Johnson family today. The parents mentioned how much your approach helped them understand their daughter's perspective. You have a real gift for this work." Maya smiled and put the book back on the shelf. Tomorrow she had 3 client sessions, a consultation with a school district about their counseling program, and a meeting with a publisher who was interested in her ideas for a book about supporting teenagers through major life transitions. The best part? She built this entire life by doing exactly what her parents had always told her to do. She'd grown up. She'd just done it on her own terms, using their own advice, and proving that sometimes the best way to show people they're wrong about you is to become everything they never believed you could be. And that old book, it turned out to be the most valuable gift they'd ever given her, just not in the way they'd intended. So there you have it. My parents gave me a book called How to Grow Up because they thought I wasn't mature enough to handle my own life. They highlighted every chapter about responsibility, marked every passage about making smart decisions, and used it as ammunition every time they wanted to remind me how childish I was. But here's the beautiful irony they never saw coming. I actually read the whole thing. Not just their cherry-picked sections about obedience, but every single chapter about independence, initiative, and taking control of your own destiny. Maya followed their advice to the letter. She grew up exactly like the book said she should. She just did it her way, not theirs. Now, 3 years later, when her parents call asking for career advice and praising her success, Maya can't help but smile. They handed her the roadmap to freedom and then acted shocked when she used it to escape their control. That book didn't teach Maya how to grow up their way. It taught her how to grow up the right way. And every time her parents see how well she's doing, they're forced to remember that they're the ones who gave her the tools to prove them wrong. Sometimes the best revenge is just becoming exactly who you were meant to be all along.